Hey, what's up, friends? How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Daled, Daf 24 of Masechta Ksubis. Friends, this is like the last kind of Mishnah related to a Pesha also, a Pesha Hitir, and we're getting to some kind of interesting-ish sugyas over here. I think we're going to stop a little bit, probably about halfway into Amud Beis, even maybe a little bit less. But, alright. Let's get started over here. Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis, about 10 lines or so from the bottom of the page at the Mishnah. V'chein shnei anoshim. So you have two fellows. Zeh omer koyin oni, v'zeh omer koyin oni. So each one says that they are a koyin. Okay. Reuven and Shimon. Reuven says I'm a kohen. Shimon says I'm a kohen. Einan ne'emonin, they are not believed. You cannot assume that they're kohanim. Uvizman she'en midin zeh harei ne'emonin. But if they're testifying not just that they are kohanim, but also that they're friends, so Reuven saying, right, that he's a kohen, but also that Shimon's a kohen. Shimon saying that Reuven's a kohen. So then, harei ne'emonin, they are believed. Rabbi Yehuda omer ein ma'id l'nechuna al pi erechad. Rabbi Yehuda says no, you cannot treat somebody as a Kohen based on the testimony of only one witness. Amr Belazar says, Imosai. When do we say that you cannot rely upon just one witness to establish the priestlyhood of a fellow? That's only if there are people contesting the status of this fellow as a priest, and they're saying, priest shmist, you're nothing. And so then one witness would not be enough to vouch for him that he's a priest. But if there are no orin, there are no rabble rousers, there is nobody contesting his priestliness, so then says Rabbi Lazar, you would be able to rely upon one witness. That you're able to assume that somebody's a Kohen based on the testimony of one witness. The Gemara is going to ask, what then is the difference between this opinion and the opinion of Rabbi Lazar? They both seem to be saying that you could rely upon one witness to establish the priestliness of a fellow. It says the Gemara Kolani Lamali. The Gemara wants to know, we just gave a whole bunch of scenarios where we say Hapesh also Hapesh Hitir, starting with at the beginning of the parak the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua that a fellow says, this field was once your father's, but he sold it to me. And then we talked about witnesses who said, this is our signatures, but Don Carleone and Luca Brasi were there threatening to put our brains over there. So there's that, and there's this woman saying that she was married, but she's divorced. We had all sorts of instances, examples, scenarios, contexts for a pesha also, a pesha hitir. Why do we need all of them? Isn't one enough? So, for Gemara, kolani lomali. How come we need so many scenarios? Tzriche. We need all of them. The Itana modet Rabbi Yoshua, because if we would only have the first scenario, right, where we said at the beginning of the parak that Rabbi Yoshua admits that if a fellow, Reuven says to Shimon, Reuven says to Shimon, you see this field of mine? It used to belong to your father, but he sold it to me. So Ditana Moda Rabbi Yoshua Mishum Deika Drora de Mamon. I might think that the reason why we could rely upon Reuven and say Apesh also Apesh Hitir, that since he says, since he's saying, look, it belonged to your father, we believe him to then say, but I bought it from him. Maybe I'll say that that's only because he had money at stake. And therefore, since he had money at stake, that if he says to Shimon, when he says to Shimon that this field belonged to your father, so that's risky business. Because by telling Shimon that the field belonged to his father, all of a sudden Shimon's going to want it. He might lose his field. So therefore, his mind the entire time is on the punchline, which is, but he sold it to me. It was your father's field, but he sold it to me. And Reuven's, intention the entire time is, he already knows from the very start that the most important thing for him is to then make sure that he says that but it was sold to him. And therefore, because his intention the entire time was on that part, the fact that it belongs to him, that's why we could say, that's why we could rely upon a pesha also a pesha yitir. Aval edim deleka dvar d'mamona imalo. But witnesses who come and say, look, this is our signature, but but we were forced or whatever. So in that case, they don't have any money at stake, and therefore they might, their intention may not be the whole time on the fact that they're going to say, but we were forced. Maybe the intention was more on the testimony that this is our signatures. So maybe we would not say a pesha also a pesha yitir. So we have to give that example as well. V'itana edim, and if we would only give the example of the witnesses, so then mishum de alma, because witnesses are they're not necessarily testifying about their self. Aval iyu de nafshe emelo. But in the situation of the real estate with Reuben and Shimon and saying that this field belonged to your father, but I bought it from him, where he has his, there's real skin in the game for him, maybe we can't rely upon him to say a pesha also a pesha yitir and say that we could trust him. But by these witnesses who say that these are signatures, but we were forced, we were coerced, since they don't have there's no implication for them, they have no interest in saying that they were coerced, so maybe that makes their testimony more reliable. So therefore, if we only had the situation of the witnesses, I might say that, but in the case of the field, since he has an interest in saying that it was sold to him, maybe we cannot rely upon him. Okay, so we need both of those cases, the field as well as the witnesses signed on the document. And now if we would only have these two examples, mishum dimamona, okay, we could say a pesha also a pesha yitir, because after all it's just financial kind of things. Aval eshes ish di isura, but eshes ish, right, when she comes and says I'm a married woman, but I was a married woman, but I'm now divorced. So where there we're talking about a real isur, we're talking about eshes ish. So Emaloi might say that we cannot say a pesha also a pesha yitir over there. Okay, fine. So we need that example as well, so that we do say a pesha also a pesha yitir dartin. Nishbeisi v'torah oni lomali. Okay, how do I need the next case of when she says that I was taken captive, but I'm tahora? And why do I need that case to say that we say a pesha also a pesha yitir? Mishum dikaboy lemisnei, because it needed to teach about it. Ve'mishanises bo edim harezelo teitze. Right, that Mishnah had given two examples. One was I was a married woman, but I got divorced, and the other one was I was taken captive, but I'm tahora. And we needed the case of being taken captive, but that she says that now but she says that she's tahora. We need that example because that Mishnah ends with saying, but if the witness, right, and then meaning that Mishnah had said, if she says I was taken captive, but I'm tahora, we believe her. But if witnesses came and said that she was taken captive, then we do not believe her to then say that she's tahora. But, says the Mishnah, if witnesses came after she was already married, right, so she got married and then witnesses came and said that she was taken captive and she says yes, but I'm tahora, so in that case we can rely upon her since she's already married. Well, that makes sense. If you say that concept of that makes sense if you say that that's referring to the Seifa, to the end of the Mishnah, to the case of when she says that she was taken captive but that she's tahora. But according to Rabbi Oshaya, we saw this machlokas yesterday between Rabbi Oshaya and Rabbi Bar Oven, that so Rabbi Bar Oven says that it's going on the Seifa about Nishbeisi v'Torah Ani, but Rabbi Oshaya had said that when the Mishnah says that if the witnesses come after she's married, that's talking about the Eshes Ish. So then it's not referring to the Nishbeisi v'Torah Ani. So then why do I need the case of Nishbeisi v'Torah Ani? Well, because on that topic of being taken captive, the Mishnah then continued and said that when you have two women who were taken captive, and right, so witnesses came and said that these two women were taken captive, and then they testify about each other that the other one, that each one was tahora, so we believe them, right? Because by shvuya kelu, that they were lenient by shvuyas, and therefore we believe them when they testify about each other, and that's why we need Nishbeisi v'Torah Ani, because to teach us this, to teach us that when they testify about each other, they are believed. So, okay, this is and how come I need to learn that they would be trusted to testify about one another? So, well, I might think to say that we have to be concerned about gomlin, and therefore it says we don't have to be concerned about gomlin. Who could tell me what gomlin is? Gomlin is, I think that what's a quid pro quo? First of all, is that a thing at all? A quid pro quo? Am I saying that right? What does that mean? Like, it's kind of like an understanding, basically. So they might have like a quid pro quo, if that's the correct thing. So they might have a quid pro quo that, you testify for me that I'm Torah, and I'll testify about you that you're Torah. So I might think that maybe we cannot rely upon them because maybe they have a quid pro quo thing going on. So Kamash Malah, and therefore it's saying no, we don't have to worry about a quid pro quo. V'chein shnei anoshim lamali. Why do we need to have our Mishnah about these two fellows who testify about each other that they are Kohanim? And that example. The answer is because of the machlokas in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, that the rabbis say that they can testify about one another, but Rabbi Yehuda says that they cannot testify about one another, and we wanted to learn that machlokas, and that is why we listed that example as well of the two fellows testifying about each other that they are Kohanim. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis thought, ani kohen v'chaverai kohen nemu lachilu b'trume v'enu nechol v'enu nemu lasio isha. You hear that? Let's read that again. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis thought, ani kohen v'chaverai kohen. So you have Reuven and Shimon. Reuven says, look, I'm a kohen, and my friend Shimon over here is oichet a kohen. He's also a kohen. And Shimon says the same thing. I'm a kohen. My friend Reuven over here is oichet a kohen. Okay, so we could believe the testimonies to the extent that both Reuven and Shimon can eat truma. But we would not allow them to marry a woman from untainted lineage. Potentially that could be, like we want to make sure that Kohanim are marrying Kohanim, right? Kohanims and Kohanoses. So therefore, if Reuven testifies about Shimon, Shimon testifies about Reuven, so in that case, we wouldn't allow them to marry sort of into this special lineage, but we can allow, right? We can give them truma. We can allow them to eat truma. So again, that when they testify about each other being a kohen, so we can feed them truma. But we cannot allow them to marry a girl from special lineage. Ad shiyu gimel. Until there are 3 of these people. Shnai me'idin alzeh v'shnai me'idin alzeh. Once you have 3, so then you can have sort of 2 of them testify about the third, that he is a kohen. So then he has 2 witnesses testifying that he's a kohen, and then he can also marry, these miyuchazdike women. Okay, and then every 2 can, if there are 3 people, so they can, do it 3 times if they want, whatever, but, you can have 2 of them testifying about the other one. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda, Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, afinu nemen lachilu b'truma. Says Rabbi Yehuda, you can't even rely upon one witness to allow them to eat truma. Atu shlosha, until you have 3, shnai midin alzeh v'shnai midin alzeh, then you can have 2 witnesses testifying about the third, that he is a kohen. Alright, fine. And that is even to be able to eat truma. So we see, like we saw in our Mishnah, that one witness would not be believed at all to testify that somebody is a kohen according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Tanna Kameh, they can testify about each other, although he does limit it to eating truma and not to marrying sort of into proper lineage, which I think could be understood to mean like a Kohen marrying a Bas Kohen. Fine. Here, where are we? Fine. Friends, you hear the question? So the Gemara wants to know, so what's pshat? How come the Chachamim say that Reuven can vouch for Shimon and Shimon can vouch for Reuven and we trust them, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that we cannot trust them? Is it because Rabbi Yehuda is concerned about a quid pro quo, that they're just going to testify about each other? You say I'm a kohen, I'll say you're a kohen, even though it might not be true. And the rabbis are not concerned about a quid pro quo, and therefore they say that if Reuven testifies about Shimon and Shimon testifies about Reuven, we can believe them that they are kohanim, at least to be able to eat truma. But one second, apparently we seem to learn the opposite, that Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about a quid pro quo, and the Chachamim are. The Tananas we learn in a Brisa. No, the Tananas we learn in a Mishnah. Hachamorin shenichnesu la'ir. If you have these donkey drivers who came into the city, and they came with grain, and they're going to sell some grain and stuff. V'omer echad man, one of these two fellows says, Shali chodosh v'shachaver hayoshan. Look, mine isn't the good stuff. Mine is new. It's not yet, old and better and gedecht. But my friend's is older and better. Shali enu masukan. Mine I haven't yet separated meiser. V'shachaver masukan. But my friend, his is givaldik. Einu nemon. Says the Tanna Kama, this guy is shady. We cannot trust him. Rabbi Yehuda Omer nemon. Rabbi Yehuda says that we can believe him. So we want to assume that what this means is that the Tanna Kama is saying that we can't believe them because they probably have some kind of a quid pro quo. Right? All of a sudden he's speaking disparagingly against his own stuff. He's saying, look, my stuff is shver, but my friend's over here is givaldik. So it sounds like the Tanna Kama is concerned that he's not being honest and that they're going to go to the next place and they're going to have the opposite story. The friend is going to talk up his stuff, and it sounds like they might have a quid pro quo according to the Chacham, but Rabbi Yehuda doesn't seem to have an issue, which is the opposite of what we're saying in our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that Reuven can't vouch for Shimon, and Shimon can't vouch for Reuven about being a Kohen, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Fine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Neman. Rabbi Yehuda says that he is believed. Omer Rav Bar Hava Omer Rav Muchlefes Hashita. So Rav Bar Hava says, Rav, look, it must be backwards. I assume it means that this Mishnah must be backwards, right? That Rabbi Yehuda is the one who is concerned about the Golem and says that we cannot trust them, whereas the Chacham said that we can trust them. All right. Abaye Omar. Abai says, look, you don't have to switch anything around, I can explain everything. Look, you're concerned why, when it comes to being a Kohen, Rabbi Yehuda says that we cannot trust Reuven to testify about Shimon and Shimon to testify about Reuven because we're concerned about that maybe I have a quid pro quo. And yet, when it comes to these two merchants who come to town, and he's speaking disparagingly against his own stuff, Rabbi Yehuda says that we can believe him. So, because b'dmai keilu, because we can be lenient by demai. What this guy is saying is that he hasn't separated meiser. Meiser is right. Meiser is that's right. What would be considered demai? Meiser would be what would be considered demai, right? So he's saying that he hasn't separated demai. But the fact of the matter is that most Amei Haaretz separate demai anyways. So there isn't really much to be concerned about according to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why he says that you can buy from this fellow because chances are he probably separated meiser anyways. Omer Rava says Tabai, Rabbi Yehuda kasha, Rabban lo kasha. Says Rabbi Tabai, okay, very good. You explained how Rabbi Yehuda isn't the problem. That when it comes to testifying about Kahuna, he doesn't trust one Kohen right, when each Kohen testifies about each other. But when it comes to the donkey drivers and the grain, he does trust them because he says Rova Amei Haaretz Ma'asunim. That explains the discrepancy between Rabbi Yehuda. What about the rabbis who in our Mishnah are saying that Reuven can testify about Shimon and vice versa about being a Kohen, and yet when it comes to these donkey drivers and the grain, the rabbis are unwilling to trust these merchant guys. So Ella de Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kedishaninan. Okay, so rather says Rabbi, look, Rabbi Yehuda, there's no problems with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, as we already explained, that there's really nothing to be concerned about when it comes to these merchants, because we're just talking about Tamai, and most Amei Aretz separate Tamai anyways. But I can also explain the opinion of the rabbis, that you can explain the rabbis like Rav Chama bar Ukva says, that it's talking about where he has his sort of tools in his hands. So here also it's talking about where he has his tools in his hands. What does that mean? It means that according to the rabbis, look, when it comes to Reuben and Shimon testifying about each other for kehuna, we can rely upon them. Sure, no problem. However, when it comes to these merchants, and one of them is saying how his stuff isn't so good, but his friend's is better, the reason why the rabbis don't trust him there is because he's actually got his sort of tools with him, right? Meaning, if he wasn't really planning to sell anything because his stuff is really inferior, well then he wouldn't have like measuring things and things, right, that he needs to sell. He's not planning to sell anyways. But here it's talking about a situation where dafka something was fishy here, right? Here he is saying how his stuff isn't good, go buy his friends, and yet he's got all the tools that he needs to be able to sell. It makes it think like, okay, why does he have this stuff? Maybe dafka here he's not selling and he's talking up his friends, but then they're going to go to the next place and his friends is going to talk about his stuff and speak up his stuff and talk up his stuff so that, people will buy his stuff in the next place. So therefore we cannot rely upon him in this case, right? We cannot, so even though when it comes to Kehuna, right, we can trust Reuben to testify about Shimon and vice versa. When it comes to these merchants, we cannot trust them because here he is saying how his stuff isn't so good, and yet he's got all the tools that he needs in order to be able to sell things. He doesn't seem to be being particularly honest. Now, we just said that Rav Chama bar Ukva seems to be talking about some kind of situation where he's got vessels, related to his work. Well, what is that situation? On the following Mishnah, you have a fellow, a potter. He left all of his pots out in the public by his shop of sorts, and then where he sells on the side of the road. And then he went to go drink epis. Hapnimios to oros, so we can assume that the inner pots are, inner jugs are pure. Vachitzonos tameos, but the outer jugs are tameh, right? So he's got a whole bunch of jugs. The ones that are sort of closer to him would be tahor. The ones that are closer to the public would be considered tameh. Ve'atanya elu ve'elu tameos. But 1 second, we have a brayso that says that all of the jugs would be considered tameh. Rav Chama bar Ukva says Rav Chama bar Ukva, yeah, all the pots, all the jugs would be considered tameh if he had his selling vessels in his hands, i.e. if it was clear that he was open for business. And if he's open for business, everyone's going to come and start touching, and then you might have people who are Amei Aretz, and they might make the things tameh. Alright? Because everybody is touching stuff and people might be tameh. But 1 second, we also have a brayso that says that all of the jugs are tahor. It's talking about where he doesn't have his sort of tools of his trade with him. Yeah, i.e. it's clear that he's now not open for business, and if he's not open for business, so then people are not going to be touching his stuff and everything will be tahor. Well, 1 second, what's the deal with the Mishnah that says that the inner ones are tahor and the outer ones are tameh? What's that talking about? If he's in business, everything's tameh. If he's not open for business, everything's tahor. So the Smicha Rishus Harabim answers the Gemara. That's talking about a situation where he's close to Rishus Harabim, Mishum Chipufe Rishus Harabim. That he's close to Rishus Harabim, and therefore people walking by, maybe their clothes will cover the jugs, and maybe they're an Am Haaretz, and the clothing of an Am Haaretz is considered tameh, and it will make the jug tameh. So therefore, we have to be concerned that any of the jugs that are on the outside of his display, that are closer to Rishus Harabim, that people might step over them and make them tameh if they're an Am Haaretz, so those would be considered tameh, but the inner ones would be considered tahor. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanon, if you want, I will say Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanon b'malim mitzuma liyuchsin kamiflege. Or you could say that when it comes to can you trust Reuven to testify about Shimon, and can you trust Shimon to testify about Reuven? We could say that the question is Malin letruma mitruma liyuchsin. Right? If you see a fellow eating truma, can you say, okay, can you assume that he's a kohen? He's eating truma, memele, he's a kohen. Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, malin mitruma liyuchsin. If you see a fellow eating truma, you can assume that he's a kohen, and therefore he says it's not enough to just have one, Reuven testify about Shimon and Shimon testify about Reuven. There's real nafkaminas over here, because anybody who sees anybody eating truma, you can assume that he's a kohen, and therefore we're going to want two witnesses to make sure that they're really kohanim. Whereas the Chacham say, no, ein malin mitruma liyuchsin, just because you see somebody eating truma doesn't necessarily mean that he's a kohen, and therefore, even one witness testifying about the other, right? Reuven testifying about Shimon, Shimon testifying about Reuven, is okay, because even if you see him eating truma, you're not going to assume that he's necessarily a full-fledged kohen. Okay. What can you assume based on a document that a fellow is a kohen? What do you mean? Can you assume based on a document that a fellow is a kohen? Well, maybe what it means is that if there's a document, and on the document is signed, I, Ploni the kohen, signed as a witness. Maybe there's a document and it says that I, so-and-so, the kohen, signed as a witness. And if we're saying that Ma'alim Mishtaris Liyuchsin, that means that since we see that there's this fellow who signed on the document and he said that he's a kohen, so we have a document with his name as being a kohen, so we can assume that he's a kohen. Man ko Messiah Ilove. Perfecting Gemara. He can write whatever he wants. He can write that he owns the Brooklyn Bridge. He can write whatever. Nobody's testifying about his signature, right? So you can't just say, well, here's a document that says that so-and-so the kohen signed it. It doesn't necessarily make him a kohen. Nobody's vouching for him. He can write whatever he wants. He can write, I, the owner of the Brooklyn Bridge, signed the document. So ani ploni kohen lavisi mana mi ploni. Rather, what it means, can you assume from a document that somebody's a kohen? It means that it says in the document that I, so-and-so, the priest, the kohen, borrowed money from somebody else, v'chasimu saidei, and then there were witnesses that signed that document that says that a certain kohen borrowed money. What do we say in that case? Amono shebishtar komasaidei. Do we say, look, the witnesses that are signed on the document are not vouching for the fact that this fellow is a kohen. They're just saying that he borrowed money. Whether he's a kohen or not is a different story. So do we say that these witnesses who are signed on the document are really just signing to the fact that this fellow borrowed money, but there's no implications for if they're actually kohanim or not? If he's actually a kohen or not? Or maybe when the witnesses sign the document, they're signing everything in the document. Yes, they're signing to say that this fellow borrowed money, but they're also indicating that everything written in the document is accurate, including that he's a kohen. So therefore the question is, if you see this document that says, I, so-and-so, the kohen, borrowed money, and there are two witnesses signed on that document, can you extrapolate from there that this fellow really is a kohen? Because after all, there are witnesses signed to that effect. So, Rav Huna, Rav Chizde, Charav Ma'ilin, Charav Mein Ma'ilin. So it's machlokos between Rav Huna and Rav Chizde. One opinion is that yes, if you have these witnesses signed on a document in which it says that this fellow is a kohen, it means that they're signing off on the fact that he really is a kohen. The other side of the coin, the other opinion is that no, you cannot assume that just because they signed in this document, it means that he's a kohen. What they're signing to is that he definitely borrowed money. Whether he's a kohen or not, they're not signing. That's not their focus over here of the witnesses. Hi friends, we can hold it here for Daf Chav Daled. We learned today a new Mishnah. We saw in there a machlokas between the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda about can you trust one witness to testify about a fellow's status being a kohen? The Chacham can say yes. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Initially, we wanted to understand this as being a machlokas about Wait, what was it about? Gomlin, right. Machlok is about Gomlin. The rabbis are not concerned that they have a quid pro quo there, that, Reuben's going to testify about Shimon and Shimon's going to testify about Reuben, whereas Rabbi Yehuda is concerned about that, and therefore he says that you would have to need 2 witnesses to testify that a fellow is a kohen. Alternatively, we said that the reason for the machlokas is based on the fact of, can you assume that just because you saw somebody eating truma, can you assume that he's a kohen? Rabbi Yehuda says yes, if you see somebody eating truma, you can assume that he's a kohen, and therefore the stakes are higher, and we have to really make sure that this fellow is a kohen in order to allow him to eat truma, because people are going to assume that if they see him eating truma, he's actually a kohen. Whereas the Chacham say, no, ein ma'alim truma liyuchsin, that just because you see a fellow eating truma doesn't necessarily mean that he is he's a kohen, and therefore it's enough for one person to testify about the other. We then asked, can you assume based on a document that a fellow is a kohen? And we said, what does it mean based on a document? It means that if it says in the document that so and so the kohen borrowed money and there are 2 witnesses signed, can we assume that they're signing off on the fact that he's a kohen, or is it just no, they're signing off the fact that he borrowed money? Whether or not he's a kohen is a different story. We said it's a machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. One opinion says that you can assume that based on the document that he's a kohen. The other opinion is that you cannot. Friends, that was Daf Chav Daled of Masechta Ksubis. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.